Ladies and gentlemen, it is 1:18 p.m. Today is February 25th, 2020. I am Master Thích Thông Lai. Greetings to all Buddhist followers in Vietnam and abroad. I would like to spend some time to have this live stream. I have a review on the impact of the Wuhan corona epidemic, how it would affect the Chinese communists, the Vietnamese communists, and the whole world. I invite you to listen to my analysis. First, we should consider the issue of media have posted on the global internet to show the way Chinese communists had treated its people as criminals. The Chinese Communist Police used welding machines to weld shut the doors of all the houses and apartment complexes with people inside. These Wuhan residents were imprisoned in their own homes. They do not have adequate medicine and medical attention. The government cut off all communications on the internet systems. You can clearly see the Chinese government isolate their people. This is the point where I raise the question for all Vietnamese in the country and the leaders of the Vietnamese government to answer. Why the Chinese communists would isolate and treat their people inhumanely? If the people escape from the quarantine area, they will be beaten until their legs are broken. If they talk back, their teeth will be punched until it fractures. The government officials use guns to suppress the people. The government even buries or cremate people when they are still alive. Those who have not yet died and cannot be treated are shoved into the incinerators. But why did they order Phạm Bính Minh, Nguyễn Xuân Phúc, and Nguyễn Phú Trọng to open the borders to receive Chinese people from the epidemic region into Vietnam? Please answer me. You welcome all Chinese people unconditionally. By doing this, who would gain and who would lose the benefit? These are just a few questions to clearly see what I am saying. With a history span thousands of years, the Vietnamese people cannot allow these leaders bow and serve the Chinese without answering any questions. Why didn't Phạm Bính Minh dare speak up? Nguyễn Xuân Phúc didn't dare to ask the Chinese ministers of public affairs, why does your government isolate your people? You quarantine, isolate thousands of people in the apartment and dormitories by welding the doors permanently. That image made the world disgust with the Chinese Communist regime. They isolate their people because they fear the epidemic will spread to healthy people and know that this is how things are done. Why did they order the Vietnamese communists, the Vietnamese Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Phạm Bính Minh, to open the doors unconditionally? Please, answer me. Cowardly Vietnamese Communist Party leaders have become Chinese Communist minimums. I asked all the military commanders leading nearly 3 million soldiers and 3 million guns, how can you bow your head to ignore the leader Nguyễn Xuân Phúc and Nguyễn Phú Trọng and Nguyễn Thị Kim Ngân to invite the viral reservoir into the countries of Vietnam? Please answer me. Are you Vietnamese? Or all the hundreds of Vietnamese communist generals, including the commanders of the military region, are also Chinese minions? Dear compatriots and all Vietnamese, you cannot give the fate of your country to these Chinese henchmen to do stupid things. Please answer me. You should also question, why does the Chinese government forbid infected people and people living in infected areas such as Wuhan to stay inside their house? Why do they take all measures to isolate, quarantine, and to suppress their people? Meanwhile, the Chinese communists forced the Vietnamese Prime Minister to accept all the Chinese that are carrying the disease from their epidemic regions into Vietnam through the border gates without any control. Please answer me. To answer this question, for 95 million Vietnamese compatriots in the country and 4 million overseas, we cannot let the people of Vietnam suffer because of these leaders who are half human, half animal, heartless, and carry no Vietnamese bloodline. I know who they are. All the military generals, please observe my comments. The first is the problem of people getting isolated on medicine, food, and transportation. If they were locked in their homes, waiting to die, will they still be afraid of death? Because they have been cornered, they will still be afraid of the Chinese Communist Party? I say no. Because they were in prison, in concentration camps, in houses with no escape, without food nor medicine, they will die eventually. Recently, the video clips of Chinese people who are no longer afraid of the Chinese police officers. They were not afraid of a warning gunfire. They have reached the end of their rope. The woman jumped off the building to commit suicide. They choose a suicidal death rather than staying in their apartments waiting for the virus to attack. Have you seen any country that treats its people like China? United States President Donald Trump, during his 4 years in the Oval Office, has done everything to make this world see the hideous face of the Chinese communists. He placed tariffs on China from 15% and raised it up to 25%. His intention is to show the world the true face of the Chinese communists. But it will take more than 5 years. However, this coronavirus, this Wuhan virus, helps President Trump to uncover the true face of a number 2 superpower country that has treated its people with human rights violation. It has triggered the eruption of anti-Chinese communist wave all over the world. I reiterate that Italy and Europe and Iran are countries that are doing business with Chinese communists. Italy is one of the countries in Europe that decided to support Chinese One Belt, One Road in trading with this country. Recently, because of the fact that Italy is friendly with Chinese ships, the corona flu outbreak has occurred in Italy's capital. In the past few days, Italy has been storming all Chinese communist stores to smash their events in anger. They said it was because these Chinese people had gone home to celebrate Lunar Chinese New Year and came back to Italy with the coronavirus. Italy did not take any measures, so the images of the extremists in Italy rushing to smash Chinese business in Italy showered the outbreak trade of the anti-Chinese. Without the occurrence of this viral disease, President Donald Trump will not be able to complete his work for the next 5 years. The President of the United States embargoed, placed an import tax, and declared the trade war to have all the U.S. companies withdraw from China and return to work in the United States, or they would be taxed from 30 to 35%. It would take some time to achieve his goal. As of today, only 15%, not hundreds and thousands of U.S. companies have fled from China. 40 to 60% are still doing business. It will also be impossible for the United States to make all the companies of Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, India, and Singapore to simultaneously close its doors and to withdraw away from Chinese territory. However, the Wuhan virus have done that, and I analyzed the reason for you. When the Chinese people are not treated as people, but treated like animals, they will be at the dead-end road, and the wave of protest will explode. The Hunan Province Declaration of Independence is stated as the death of Hubei Province General, policemen, policies, wives and children, the wives and children of army personnel. Currently, prisoners also have hundreds and thousands of Chinese people dying. According to all U.S. intelligence agencies, the number of communist troops infected with the Wuhan coronavirus is up to 30%. The number of police officers serving from Chinese communist regime have also been infected up to 30%. Now that the Chinese minions and henchmen also died, the special protective agents from Xi Jinping have also died. They were not crazy enough to continue to be minions or their families locked up in Wuhan. And they saw that their comrades were also brutally treated. Because of that, they wish no longer to be wholehearted loyalty to Xi Jinping. Why do I dare say that? In these last few days, I have watched Xi Jinping's speech in China. Xi Jinping claimed that the Chinese central government of China has failed because of the rapid spread of the Wuhan coronavirus. He said that China had surrendered because there is no way to stop the outbreak of the coronavirus. When he just finished the beginning of his speech, the last part, he was calling all the important provinces such as Jiangdong, Shenzhen, Zhengzhou, Shanghai, Suzhou, Huangzhou, please open all factories and do not stop the trading from province to province. The cities of Shanghai, Jiangdong, and specifically Shenzhen hold 40% of the Chinese economy. He gave such orders, but all the comrades of Wuhan, Hubei, Jiangdong, Shanghai, and Shenzhen did not follow the instructions faithfully. They remain isolated and prohibit all outside travelers from moving into their territories. This indicated that Xi Jinping has lost control of his regime. In the past month, Chinese communists have completely removed most of the tariffs from the United States because of hunger. They imported hundreds and thousands and tons of pork, hundreds and thousands and tons of soybeans, and hundreds and thousands of tons of U.S. supplies. They paid off when their supplies were delivered, all on the east coast of China. However, all the goods just lay there because of the lack of workers. The drivers refuse to deliver the foods and goods into the epidemic areas in Wuhan City. They refuse to transport supplies into areas where the epidemic is raving, such as the 35 provinces and cities of China, including the 5 major cities with widespread epidemics. All U.S. containers of pork, rice, soybeans, and food are lying there waiting for delivery to provinces that have shortage of food. Currently, Hubei has consumed all of their reserve food. The people of the Chinese Communists will be starved within the next few weeks. Hunan doesn't open their stores to sell supplies and goods to Hubei. Guangdong also is in seclusion. Shanghai is also in seclusion, and so is Shenzhen. And the same goes to Beijing. Food is not enough to feed people for 2 or 3 weeks. That was the conclusion made by the Chinese economic observers. When famine erupts, it really happens. The U.S. government doesn't let starvation rave in any states. The U.S. government will immediately send troops, all military aircraft, C-141 engine transportation. The Galaxy C-5 will make an airlift supply. The U.S. military will take charge to transport goods, foods, and necessities. They do not let their people starve. That's how countries with democracies that elect by the people would do. They value the people, and they stop all the causes that lead to the event of government killing people. U.S. government would not dare to send the police to command the welders to permanently weld shut their people's doors. There is no free government that treats its people without respect. But to the Chinese Communists, people in the infected areas are animals. In my point of view, the Chinese currently do not use the military to airdrop supplies, indicating the weakness of the Chinese regime. The world has clearly seen that China only talk but does no do. When the incident happens, it is not possible for the Chinese to utilize air freight to transport goods, necessities, and medicines for the people. They just lock their people in, and the people have to wait for death. The true evil face of Chinese communists was clearly seen by the world. The flu pandemic shows it to the world clearly. The anti-Chinese good waves have emerged in the world as evidenced by President Donald Trump visiting India. Hundreds and thousands of Indians gather in a square of a stadium to welcome President Donald Trump as a hero of India. President Trump came to India and brought along the following resources. India has produced weapons since ancient times. India has built nuclear weapons and nuclear power submarines. India also made aircraft, but 80% of the important national defense weapons are still imported from Russia. India, from the past to present time, it still uses the Russian MiC fighter flights and Russian submarines. Indian natives still buy Russian warships. However, the Times, the India Prime Minister made an immediate gift to U.S. by buying 3.8 billion weapons. At the time, the United States government signed an important business deal. In addition to the 3.7 billion of U.S. defense weapon purchase, there are also tens of billions of dollars in construction program and purchase contracts. Many people have looked at the India Prime Minister as a foolish man. Why import U.S. goods? Indeed, the Prime Minister of India is very intelligent. He knows very well, after this corona flu pandemic, the Chinese communists won't be able to recover. Even with the cheap labor, China is no longer attractive to investors because people are afraid of the dangers of the corona flu pandemic. Only India has a population of over 1 billion. The skills of the Indian people are also very good. India's scientists, technical team, and engineers are also very good at cheap prices. Therefore, India was willing to spend $7 billion to $10 billion to import U.S. goods, but in return, the United States would choose India to invest to help the country, India, become wealthy. For example, the U.S. President Donald Trump was president in India just as President Nixon of the United States was in Beijing in 1972, when the United States was targeting China. And also, in 1972, Zhou Enlai came to the United States and signed a treaty. Since then, the United States began to do business with China. Now, President Donald Trump visiting India is like opening the portal of using the cheap labor from the people of India, of the nation of India, and the use of their brain power. Indian scientists and engineering teams will help the United States and also grow the economy of the world. As you can see, the world economy has been affected by the coronavirus. If you watch President Trump's speech one day, he requests that Congress should immediately fund a budget of $2.5 billion to spend. What is this budget being used for? This requested fund will be used to prepare for the Control Disease Center, which is an organization that is responsible for the preparation of the corona outbreak. Do you think the $2.5 billion budget requested by the President is a simple thing? It will also be used to assist to mobilize the U.S. military force. As a part of this fund, we will allow the Department of Justice bring troops to the epidemic-affected areas if the outbreak happens to set up the field combat centers. You have to consider that $2.5 billion is not a normal thing to be ignored. The United Nations has predicted that a refugee crisis will occur with 1.4 billion Chinese. In the past, when the northern Vietnamese communists violated the Paris Treaty and sent troops to take over Saigon on April 30th, there was a wave of refuge from the South Vietnamese who fled to other Southeast Asian countries. The High Commissioner for Refuge has called on the world to contribute hundreds of millions of dollars to set up refuge camp on Galang Island, in Badang Island, in the Philippines, in Thailand, and all around the world. However, the number of Vietnamese refugees from the beginning of the seasons of April 30th into the end of the refuge season in 1989 was about 500,000. That number was simply political refuge. These people of the South was attacked by corona. All the staff of the Refuge High Commissioner was able to join the rescue team.
You should think if the Chinese Civil War happens, which country would open its border gate to receive over 1 billion Chinese people? I didn't say all of the Chinese would run away. How many people will flee from Beijing, Hunan, Guangdong, and Jiangxi? China has five military regions. The general of each military region will rebel to protect their own stake. They didn't listen to Xi Jinping. The obvious evidence was that Xi Jinping called them to open all production facilities and to open all the factories, yet these generals didn't respond yet. Xi Jinping had called on the provinces that have not been affected yet to open their supplies warehouse to aid the affected province. They didn't even bother to open their warehouse, and they still closed their city borders. In the world's eyes, China is still a country as a whole. In fact, they have already divided into 5 or 7 divisions without firing a gun. Famine is the source of bandits in looting. The lack of food will initiate these regional generals to send their troops for self-preservation and looting. They will end up in war. I didn't say that all the 1.4 billion Chinese will run away to take refuge. Hypothetically, they say there will be only 400 million Chinese that will flee away. But they don't have any place to run to. North Korea is not an option for sure. Out of the 14 countries that have common borders with China, Vietnam is the only place that is available to accept these Chinese refuge. Those welfare experts foresee the obvious path of these 400 million Chinese refuge with take, running into Vietnam. Now, the Chinese Communist Party is ordering Pham Binh Minh, he is the Deputy Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister of the Vietnamese, to open the border gates unconditionally. The border gates open while there is no civil war in China. Once the civil war happens in China, the starvations of many provinces will happen. It will be chaotic. At the moment the outbreak started to explode in Giang in Xi-Han province. Giang is far from Vietnam. When these provinces will be short of food, where will Guangdong army go to ask for supplies? The military commander of Guangdong military region would order Nguyễn Phú Trọng to transport rice and supplies. At the moment, as the shortness of protective mass happens in China, these commanders demand the mass from Vietnam. In a few days in the near future, they will command for medicine, rice tributes, and all other things they need. Nguyễn Xuân Phúc, Nguyễn Phú Trọng will not dare to argue. At that time, if given all supplies to China, the Vietnamese people will be starved. If Vietnam declines the request, then China will send 400 million refugees over. Among these Chinese refugees fled to Vietnam, in which only if 100,000 people are infected. That still would wipe out all the entire Vietnamese race. Vietnam is now in one of the 5 to 6 countries that have been marked by the World Health Organization and the U.S. government as the country with pathogens spreading in the community. The outbreak is getting ready to explode in Vietnam. 60% of Vietnamese economy is dependent on Chinese communists. The factories need raw materials and materials from China. Just to fabricate and export a shirt, Vietnamese communist garment companies need everything from fabric, thread, and all sources from China. Now that the Chinese communist regime is dying, hundreds of tons of porks and soybeans brought from the United States were left rotten. China already paid with trillions of dollars to the United States, and it didn't even have people to transport into the epidemic areas. By now, the Chinese communist is as good as dead. Tons of porks and soybeans have been brought from the United States, left to spoil in the shipping container. China already paid billions of dollars to the United States, but no one to transport these supplies into the epidemic areas because their drivers were afraid to die and they refused to enter. They cannot perform airlift like the United States. I made it clear there was no other place for the Chinese to refuge once the Chinese communists have civil war. They will run to Vietnam. Vietnam will become the biggest refuge camp full of corona-borne virus of Wuhan. There were many Buddhists who told me, "Master, I have listened to you now. I have been reserving enough food for 1 month. I'm sorry, but a month is not enough. It is just not enough." 1 month is good when the markets are still open. In my opinion, the Vietnamese people are still very naive. I have talked to the people who work for the U.S. government. They said it is not normal, even that Russian government has sent its troops over Russia's border. There are now over 1 million troops along the borders of China. Upon the Wuhan viral outbreak, the Russian Prime Minister and the President of Russia ordered their armies to open fire at any Chinese that cross its border. You see it clearly. And the second one is North Korea. Why do North Korea and Russia know about this corona epidemic so well? Because North Korea and Russia are well aware that this coronavirus has been made by Chinese biolaboratories. North Korea knows well about this virus. A North Korean high-ranking officer came back from Wuhan, received orders to isolate himself. Thinking, being a valuable prime member of the North Korea, he refused to be in the isolation camp. Kim Jong immediately ordered to execute this officer because he knew there is no medication for this Wuhan virus. These two countries know this virus was created by China, so they knew strict orders to prevent the virus from spreading. Following Russia and North Korea, the 14 countries that have the common borders with China decided to close their border gates as well. It is not a coincidence that the United States ordered to arm all of their nuclear warheads. Up to now, the United States doesn't arm their nuclear warheads, meaning they don't load these warheads on their nuclear submarines, on their warship, and on their aircraft such as B-1, B-2, and B-52. What was the reason for doing this? The United States predicts once the famine will happen, the Chinese people will be raging because they will no longer be afraid to die. Money will have no value at that time. It will be thrown out from the windows like scrap paper. The Chinese Communist people and military forces will die, and especially doctors and nurses. They are the two important teams in controlling the flu epidemic. However, they will run away as fast as they can when the infected reach over tens and thousands. The phrase of "doctors are gentle mothers" were used by these communist doctors as a words at the tip of their tongues. They only can do the work because of the money. The Vietnamese doctors and nurses are also follow the same path. Other people who got infected were diagnosed as hit by the wind, internal bleeding, or brain hemorrhaging. Once these doctors and nurses start to get infected, they will no longer be loyal and operate in the hospitals of the Communist Party. The healthcare system will raise the white flag to surrender. When these white coat team of socialist Vietnamese communists see their colleagues left one after another, they will also run away because they can no longer use the phrase of "doctors are gentle mothers." These doctors live because of the money, because of the bribery. These are the parts of the views about China from various economy observers around the world. China is at the dead end, therefore they confine their own people. The Chinese government is at point of no return, so they burn their people who are sick but still alive. They are at the end of their ropes. They mass burn their people because the incinerators could no longer handle the corpse. For a long time, China has been bragging and proclaiming to be the number 2 superpower country in the world, yet they could not do any airlift rescue operation. They do not direct their military to provide aids and medical support, nor they deliver the containers of the U.S. pork and soybeans in Shanghai and Guangdong ports. Recently, Chinese people have been trying to run, but they have nowhere to go. Every day, people are escaping from the Wuhan city. Although those 5 million people fled before January 21, 2020, but there are still 7 million people who are still there. Every day they still flee by all means, such as walking and treading mountain roads to Vietnam and to Guangdong. They are moving toward areas that still have food and providence with ports because there are still food. They are entering Vietnam while the rebellions haven't yet happened. When the rebellion happens, the commanders of the Guangdong military region had 100 million. They will order Vietnam to open its border gates and export all the rice, like Vietnam had exported tons of masks recently. These rebellions don't need masks anymore, but they will need food. Surely the coward Nguyễn Giong Phúc, Nguyễn Thị Kim Ngân, Nguyễn Phú Trọng would obey without hesitation. At that time, the Vietnamese intercontinental train will be used to transport basic necessity to the Guangdong military region and transporting the hordes of Chinese refuge back to Vietnam. At that time, you think all that reserve food will be enough for the Vietnamese people to live? The Mekong Delta is now contaminated with salt water. Farmers in Vietnam have to cut rice fields to feed their cattle due to the seawater intrusion caused by the Chinese communist dams to block the upstream of the Mekong River. The Vietnamese people is already hungry. The airport now reduced fares by 70%, but still have no passengers.
All the entertainment centers will soon become the second or third Wuhan. That is my personal point of view. It was not a coincidence that the United States have their naval fleet patrol the Pacific Ocean. It was also not by chance that the U.S. announced their military are armed with nuclear warheads. Arming for what? Why did President Trump announce yesterday that Congress will spend $2.5 billion to prepare for an epidemic in the 50 states? This $2.5 billion will be used for airlift supply and mobilizing the military. This military troop will help to support the area with the outbreak. They will develop an area full of medicine and adequate supplies to cope with the outbreak that may occur in the United States in the upcoming days. Now you can clearly see my amazement. When the war happens, there is nowhere for the Chinese to run. The United Nations Refuge can try to call for support, but no country will open their doors to set up refuge camps for 400 to 500 million Chinese. Only the Socialist Republic of Vietnam will open its border gates. In essence, Vietnam is a province of China, and the leaders of Vietnam are Chinese minions. At that time, Vietnam will become a huge refuge camp. 300 to 400 million Chinese will flee to Vietnam. The Chinese communists have developed deployment of their special troops and weapons in their special economy zone in Vietnam. When a civil war breaks out between Chinese Communist Party, Vietnam will become a refuge for Chinese people. At that time, there will be famine and shortness of medicine. Will the army and police still be loyal to the party? At that time, the coronavirus will not spare the army nor the police. Police will die from flu, and army soldiers will also soon die from the flu. Right now, the soldiers and police should turn their guns to eliminate those enemies whom allow the virus and the Chinese communists to deploy out of our homeland. Only comrades of the military district can make the difference. I also am happy to see Taiwanese newspaper published an article yesterday. It said,
A crack happened in the ruling regime of Vietnam. How could the Taiwanese conclude that? They said that for some reason, the Vietnamese Coast Guard ships received an unknown order. Certainly not from Nguyễn Xuân Phúc or Nguyễn Phú Trọng, because Nguyễn Xuân Phúc and Nguyễn Phú Trọng obediently followed the Chinese, just as Pham Binh Minh obeyed the Chinese Communists to open its border gates to catch the virus and devastate Vietnam. Nguyễn Xuân Phúc did not dare to close the border. Therefore, this was not an order from Nguyễn Xuân Phúc. The order to the Vietnamese Coast Guard ships to go to the Spratly Islands outside the East Sea to protect Vietnamese fishermen from the Chinese coast from bullying. Both Chinese and Vietnamese communists now have Coast Guard ships in the South China Sea. In fact, the Taiwanese media analyzed that Nguyễn Xuân Phúc would never given the order to the Coast Guard to the East Sea to protect Vietnamese fishermen from being attacked by the Chinese Coast Guard. Someone has a higher authority and dared to disobey Nguyễn Phú Trọng and Nguyễn Xuân Phúc order. Someone dared to order the Vietnamese Coast Guard to be present and ready to protect the Vietnamese fishermen. That is the latest news from the Taiwanese press. They showed the rife in Vietnamese party. We can clearly see a second rift that Nguyễn Đức Trọng, president of Hanoi City, dared to raise his voice in front of a large group of people working in the Hanoi government to warn and demand all the party's media and radio station must warn the corona epidemic will break out in Hanoi one day. Mr. Nguyễn Đức Trọng went against Nguyễn Xuân Phúc words. Nguyễn Xuân Phúc said that the disease has stopped in Vietnam. Vietnam is a country that has stopped the epidemic. However, Nguyễn Đức Trọng suggested to have the police to go to each house to check out and find out who is incubating the disease. You see clearly that the Coast Guard has set sail to protect Vietnamese people, and their guns are ready to fire at the Chinese ships. The chairman of the Hanoi People's Committee, Nguyễn Đức Trọng, is also a key member of the political party. He bluntly called for the press conference to inform the people about the dangers of Hanoi. No one knows the outbreak situation in Hanoi as well as he does, because he was the one who's in charge of all the enemy, police, and all department, so he raised an alarm. Nguyễn Xuân Phúc said one way, and the chairman of the Hanoi City Committee said the other. Nguyễn Xuân Phúc, Nguyễn Phú Trọng, Nguyễn Thị Kim Ngân opened the border gates for the Chinese to come in and out, while the Vietnamese Coast Guard went out to the eastern seas to protect the Vietnamese. The commentary analysis of the Taiwanese newspaper had determined that the Chinese Communist regime had entered a division, well engaged into civil war. The Vietnamese Communist is prepared to be divided just like the Chinese Communists. When the army troops had sacrificed their lives in the battle, and they realized that their team was no longer safe, the Communist Party does not have any medicine to help them, and numerous of their senior Chinese leaders will die. Naturally, in the future, a series of high-ranking leaders of Vietnamese Communists will also die. My words at the moment are completely clear about what will happen to the people of Vietnam. There is no other way for you. It is true that Vietnamese can no longer go to Korea because over 1,000 Korea are infected. Why does Korea have so many infections? Because South Korea is a free country. The South Korean government is elected by its people and not by the party. Therefore, South Korean people will tell the truth. South Korean doctors and nurses do not hide and conceal information. Furthermore, they do not have orders from the police to conceal the truth. When patients die because of the COVID-19, they will state the exact illness. A Korean woman traveled to China and returned from the epidemic area. She was asked to enter the quarantine for 14 days, but she did not obey the quarantine orders of the South Korean government. She attended a ceremony in a local church of about 1,000 parishioners. Eventually, after the ceremony, the coronavirus spread. It broke out in South Korea, and the president of the South Korean immediately ordered to spend a budget of 2 trillion Korean currency to deal with this Corona Wuhan pandemic. This shows in a democratic country they value the lives of their people because they are elected by the people. On contrary, all dictatorial countries, especially the communist regime, consider their people's lives useless and are like less than animals. That is the way of the Chinese communists, and so is Vietnamese communists. You should think about my words carefully. Why does the Chinese communist burn its people alive? When people start to get infected, they will send welders to weld shut the doors of the apartments, with 500 to 1,000 people still living inside. They lock them inside without water, no electricity, or internet to let these people starve to death. It is forbidden to go outside of the house. If the people leave the house, they will be beaten and arrested. If the people argue, their teeth will be beaten until broken. If they flee, their legs will be beaten until punishment. Why did the Chinese order the Vietnamese government to open its borders for Chinese people that are infected with the corona flu? The Chinese run to Vietnam every day, even though there is no civil war yet. When a civil war breaks out, Vietnam will become a huge refuge camp. All Vietnamese necessity will not be enough to feed the Vietnamese people. But now we'll have to feed an additional 400 million Chinese. Let the Vietnamese people think of the 14 countries sharing its common borders with China. At that time, the refuge was not able to run through Russia. The Chinese communists at that time has lost its power, running through North Korea, and they will get gunned down. A North Korean party member did not follow the quarantine order when he returned to the country from Wuhan. He was executed even though he worked for the North Korean government. Let alone a Chinese from Wuhan running across North Korea's border. He will be shot immediately. Burma was also shot yesterday. Every country closed its borders, and India is no exception. India has a long history of wars over the borders with China for decades. Only the Socialist Republic of Vietnam would obey to the orders of Xi Jinping. Socialist Vietnam will open its door and turn the country into a giant refuge camp. The refuge camp used for Chinese communists that are infected with the corona. Vietnam has no stockpiled necessities for 1 month. How do they have enough supplies during the time of the Chinese communist civil battles? Each Chinese military general would not give up necessities. Guangdong Province, Yangtze City, Xinjiang City, Shanghai City, Beijing City, Wuhan City, Hunan City, and Hubei City declare independency. They would declare independency like Taiwan, and then Taiwan will support them. China of Chiang Kai-shek considered free. At that time, because of protecting those people, Taiwan will have to go to war with the Chinese army. The Chinese Communist Army and Taiwanese army will be at war. The war will happen one day, not far away. I want to make it clear that if the Chinese Communists attack Vietnam now, upon arriving at Hanoi, the world will condemn the Chinese army and it will have to stop immediately, or the United Nations will act. But the Corona army of the Chinese, plus 400 million Chinese running through Lang Sang and Hu Nhi borders, are the ones that they cannot stop. Now that Vietnam is open freely, they can just come in. Vietnam will soon become the only Corona refuge camp in the world. 400 million Chinese people run to Vietnam will kill 95 million Vietnamese. The Vietnamese, if they don't die from the illness, they will die from starvation. If they do not die from starvation, they will die because of the lack of medicine and other necessities. For families that have school-aged children, please be prepared. At that time, money will no longer have any value. 1 kilogram of rice will be worth more than an ounce of gold. As you can see in the past few days, all the stock market has lost. The United States market lost 1,000 points. However, 1,000 points of the United States market will be recovered after President Trump's trip to India. He signed tens of billions of dollars in contract. Also, because the U.S. goods sell only 20% of the world, the other 80% are consumed by Americans. In case the flu spreads into the United States, they will operate airlift and mobilization troops into the epidemic area. In Saigon, people don't have enough masks, but the government export all the masks and give them away to the Chinese. They also gave away $500 million. When the pandemic and civil war breaks out in China, the commanders of the Guangdong military would tell the Vietnamese communists to send over rice immediately. At that time, when Nguyễn Xuân Phúc dared to disagree, when Nguyễn Phú Trọng dared to ignore these requests, only the military zone 1 and 2, who ordered the Vietnamese Coast Guards to confront the Chinese Coast Guard, they are the one that would send troops to go against Nguyễn Xuân Phúc order. Don't you agree with me? But if you're planning to extradite, please ask now. Don't wait until it becomes too late. At that time, you have no choice but to punish the criminals of the Vietnamese who have sold the country. We cannot hand over our fatherland to these cowards. You must hand it over to those who have heroic blood of Quang Trung, Nguyen, Huy, and Trung's sisters. Those are the ones that protect the country. Best regards. Believe me or not to believe me. Wait 3 more weeks and you shall see.